I mean, I'll give you my feedback as somebody who, when I was, in Canada, was a pretty ardent liberal. I grew up in a liberal household. My father canvassed religiously for the Liberals. And I think that at some point after I moved to the United States, they took wokeism, which I think, look, at some level was rooted in something very important, which was how do you get marginalized folks to be seen? But unfortunately, along the way, just got perverted by folks that just use it as a cudgel to censor people, to make other people feel guilty, to judge people. And so I think we all would agree that it's kind of become this virus. The thing that it masks are all of these other really bad things that come along with it. And one of them in Canada, which Justin Trudeau is case zero of, is also when nepotism goes bad. His father was an incredible, exemplary prime minister in Canada. Set the benchmark. On all dimensions was just incredible. Cool, composed, moved the country forward, brought the country together. And then fast forward 25 or 30 years in a vacuum of leadership, what basically happened, we picked this guy who was up until that point a substitute teacher. And the other claim to fame was appearing twice in brownface. Okay, so making fun of people like me, and elected him prime minister. And what happened was he became the sort of like virtue signaler in chief of this very important G8 country. And it was all kind of bumbling along. And in the absence of anybody else that was able to step up and offer an alternative, he got reelected, barely, but he did. Then these things happened in the last year. And when you look through that prism is how you can see what happens if a country doesn't draw a line and finally take a stand. So we had this guy who was ill qualified and way over his head, who shouldn't have been in this role as prime minister, get put in that position. When finally a group of people in Canada pushed back, in this case, the truckers, he and the entire government explicitly labeled them as Nazis, right? And said these people need to be put down and completely dismantled. It didn't seem like it was right. We called that out. We all talked about it. And we said, this doesn't smell right on the surface. These are really, seems like good, earnest people that are just trying to make a point and are not being heard. Then you had this thing 3 weeks ago, two or 3 weeks ago, where he actually had a speech in front of the entire parliament where he accused the largest democracy in the world, India in this case, of coming into Canadian soil and assassinating a Canadian citizen, which is an enormous allegation to levy. And what was important to know about that allegation was that it was done without the explicit vocal support of either Britain or the United States, which would be the two most natural allies that Canada would present that information to. And instead of doing it behind a closed door to Modi, he did it on live stage like it was like some theatrical performance. Then India follows up and says, this guy's kind of known to be a little bit of a drug addict and was on a 2-day bender, and the Indian drug dog smelled a bunch of cocaine on the plane. Then they have this thing for Vladimir Zelensky where everybody was there to sort of like virtue signal this war, and then they actually invited a Nazi and then gave him a standing ovation. So when you put it all together, I think what it shows is just a lack of professionalism, which also belies just a lack of experience and capability. And so I think what it shows is just like, isn't this enough? Like, have we not seen enough of these examples where you can actually start to ask yourself, why can't we just get really good, competent people to do these jobs? Why can't we actually embrace free speech and all of what it means and explore that? Why can't we have people that don't need to theatrically perform on stage? Because eventually you're going to make these mistakes and you're going to embarrass your entire country. And then you're going to imperil relations with some really important allies. And I think this is a moment in time where all of those things need to be questioned and put on the table.
You're clearly questioning his competence here, because to not have the care to check who is going to speak in front of Parliament is crazy. And just to make it super clear, the speaker that invited Hunka, that was Anthony Rota, resigned on Tuesday. And Trudeau says Rota, the person who invited the Nazi, is solely responsible.
Well, then he blamed Russian misinformation on top of that. But Jason, the prime minister, who is the most important politician in the country, doesn't show up someplace unless the office knows who else is going to be there. He knew that Zelensky was going to be there. He would have known who the guest list was.
Yeah,
so
no,
this was just
he
scapegoating to cover it up. But the bigger issue is just...
To be clear, you're not saying that they invited a Nazi on purpose and cheered for a Nazi on purpose. Nobody's saying that. You're saying there's a lack of care here, and it's
a lack of competence. It's a lack of competence.
Yeah.